Bienvenidos. This is Joshua Smyser-DeLeon. We have two very special guests with us today. We have Cristina Gutierrez and Denise Ruiz. They are the co-founders of the Honeycomb Network, a holistic co-working and co-creating collective care sanctuary. You can tell y'all have put a lot of intentionality into this space. So thank you for welcoming us to your space, and thank you for being on the show.
You're welcome.
Would love for you to kind of give our audience the quick elevator pitch. Who are you both? And Cristina, why don't we start with you?
Thank you for introducing me, for having me on the podcast as well. But I am Mexican, mother of two, graduate also of DePaul University. But I am an Ayurvedic health counselor and herbalist, and someone who, has been in and out of Humboldt Park my entire life. So this area is something that's very special to me. Getting to work here and run a space here is something that I take to heart. I have great pride in being able to be here in this neighborhood, working on, holistic wellness and the greater good of the people that I serve.
Denise Ruiz. I am Boricua, born and raised in Chicago between Humboldt Park and Logan Square. Also a mother of two. I am a co-founder here at the Honeycomb Network. I also am a designer. I have another business called Madre de Perla Designs. So I've been doing that for about 8 years as well. So yeah, and so I'm so glad. Thank you so much for having us on this, on this show. And I'm glad that you're loving the vibes. It's a whole vibe here. And we love it when people feel it. It's an energy. I think that, we have photos and we have different things, but you have to be here to, I think, experience it. And so we're always really honored and humbled when people actually do feel that. So thank you.
Give our audience kind of the high level view. What is the Honeycomb Network?
So you gave our elevator pitch right in the intro, right? We're a holistic co-working space, co-creating space, collective care sanctuary. And each of those words are really intentional for us when we describe the work here, because as Denise said, she'd been ruminating on this space for a long time. I'd been ruminating on what my work would look like in its own space for a very long time. And her and I started working together on basically a mobile version of this, which was called Books Brunch Botanica. And that was something that centered women of color specifically as facilitators, as leaders, as creators. And we would host them to teach workshops that centered ancestral medicines, whatever their ancestral medicines were. And that could have been anything from make your own medicine to candle making workshops. But ultimately, we were centering collective care. And not for a profit, not for anything but the need and the greater good of it. Something we both felt like we needed at that time, and it was something we saw other people jump at immediately. So we grew really quickly from that. And I bring that up to say that was kind of the inspiration for how do we ground this into a brick and mortar and sustain the growth that we've already created with our just little once a month workshops, right? So in order to ground our work into the Honeycomb Network, we needed the co-working space. We need to center professional development. We need to center space for people to do work, and whether that's mobile work for somewhere else or entrepreneurial work. We wanted to create that space because though, we're running our own businesses and trying to, run a brick and mortar as well, we need space for that, even though we need space creatively. I think more than anything is what we want, but we need space to work, right? So co-creating or co-working was a big piece of okay, this is a business model that we could really ground into a space. But then the co-creating is a huge element of how we move, right? We want to be creating collectively. We want to bring in as many people from the community as we can. We want to grow our team in a really aligned, intentional way. People that are here for the greater good, people that are here for, racial healing, unpacking intergenerational trauma, people that are really here to be part of a network in a intentional way, I guess is the best way I could put it. So co-working, co-creating, collective care, I think both of those things bleed into collective care because we need to feed those desires within us in order to be whole, I always frame it as these are liberation moves. We're making these moves collectively to have our own financial liberation, our own energetic, spiritual liberation, in the sense that we're pursuing our desires. We're really moving from our integrity, from like our heart center, right? You know, I want to be a creator, a designer, or whatever it is. Like, you're not going to be whole unless you can really feed those things, right? A lot of people end up in their retirement being like, oh, I wish I could have danced my whole life or painted. You know, it doesn't always have to be a creative thing. It's just where my mind goes. But we want to nurture that now for ourselves and then for the generation beyond us. You know, both of us are mothers, and the divine guidance that we've received consistently in this project is, this is legacy building. This isn't necessarily for us. This is for all the young people that are around, that are experiencing like a whole new way of life right now. We didn't know we were going to do this in a pandemic. We had no idea that was going to be a part of it. But somehow all of these things are conducive to one another, right? A lot of people are reimagining what life looks like, what business looks like, what working among people that look like you looks like, you know, what seeing BIPOC people in leadership looks like. All of these things are things we've been thinking about for years, but are like now kind of bubbling up to the mainstream and are, I think, inspiring people in different ways. So I'm really glad that we're here to kind of like hold the space for folks that have been in the game or folks that are just entering and looking for a community. You know, we're here to hold brave space for that. And so the last part of that, like elevator pitch, sanctuary, right? We're co-working, co-creating, collective care sanctuary. We come at this with a very sacred intention.
Really quickly, just, you know, going back to Books, Prints, and Botanica, you know, like a lot of that is, a lot of that intentionality and root is really what's rooted here, right? Which is about accessibility to wellness, accessibility to knowledge, accessibility to nourishment, to collective care, right? And how do we take that? How do we bring that here in a way that's like unpretentious, that's accessible to our community, that's taking it from a tower, you know, many times, or co-opted from other, some other people, other folks, white people, I'm just going to say it, or just people outside of our communities who have co-opted our culture, our sacred, symbols and history, and either, co-opted it or sold it back to us at prices that we can't afford, right? How do we reclaim ourselves? How do we reclaim ourselves as leaders and reclaim our brilliance, right? And so having that space to do that in a way that's nurturing. And it also talks about the whole person. It's very sacred here in the sense that, also Cristina and I have both lost our mothers. Both of our mothers have passed away. And, for us, ancestor reverence is integral, in a lot of the things that we do. And even outside of our own lineage, just thinking about our ancestors of our culture, right? In our community, in the islands, really thinking about how do we honor those ancestors, but also forge new paths, right? We have an apothecary, a boutique apothecary. We offer herbs. We offer used books and new books. And that was also part of Books, Brunch, and Botanica, again, accessible knowledge. So we were, I was popping up there with curated used books at $2 and $3, and that was really intentional to try to have something that was accessible, something that people can come to and they can get that knowledge, they can get those books, they can get those herbs, they can connect with, other BIPOC artists, women of color artists, and see themselves. A lot of times, we're not able to find spaces where we could truly see ourselves. And so how do we, provide that reflection? So, the Honeycomb Network really is about providing a reflection. So, and that's what we want from everything you see here, from the art on our walls to the artists who are on our shelves to the books on our table. All of that is BIPOC centered. So anyone can come here, but Black, Indigenous, people of color are who's centered here. And it's important to do that because we're not centered out there. So how do we find and create spaces where we can do that, where we can nurture those leadership skills? Because the people that we have running our workshops here are not always necessarily college graduates. We're about to have a workshop in the fall with a long-term community member who's gonna come in and teach knitting. To me, that's just as important a skill share as someone coming in who may have graduated and has their master's. And so I think it's important to have all of that space here to showcase our brilliance, and that our brilliance comes in a multitude of ways.
You both said a lot of really great stuff, and I'm just going to kind of jump around in response to what you shared. First off, totally agree. I think an education is important, but the form that takes is just as important. So I don't think everybody's meant to go to higher ed. You know, I think we've done a disservice to a lot of people by eliminating opportunities to get into the trades, for example. I mean, even the services that y'all are providing, having those resources or programming that you can kind of plug in to learn some of those skills. If someone wanted to get into knitting, if someone wanted to get into herbal care, you know, what opportunities are available to them? It feels like it's kind of hard to find those. And then you had mentioned something I found really interesting as well, Denise, about co-opting. Co-opting things from our culture. And this is at a smaller scale, kind of, but two examples. I remember reading about racism in produce. And I found it fascinating because the example they were using was aguacates. How we've been putting aguacates in our food for generations. But all of a sudden, some people like it on their toast. And now an aguacate is like triple the value. So hopefully they don't come for our panas. Hopefully they don't come for, you know, a lot of the stuff that I really enjoy in Puerto Rican cuisine. But it almost feels like it's only a matter of time before that just gets kind of overtaken as something new when it's been a part of our culture for years. Same thing with like walking. I had saw this other story. It was a study that showed walking barefoot is actually healthier for your like spinal alignment for your body.
No kidding.
Right? I know.
Indigenous people been doing it. Like,
Amen. And what happened when the ships came over, the colonizers came over, they called us all savages for walking barefooted. And now it's like, now you got shoes that look like feet.
Right.
And they're making tons of money off that.
Right.
So it's, anyway, just.
We've always been ahead of the curve. Like,
Yeah.
That's why it's important to look at those, you know, and know our history and know our lineage to understand that, especially when you're not taught that. So then you do think that you don't come from anything that's of knowledge. You know, you do think that something outside of yourself is better than you, you know? And so we really want to flip that narrative here.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think if people challenge themselves to really research, because it's not going to be in our school books, it's not going to be in our history books, but even something as simple as like a Latinx person created the color TV. I mean, and think about watching Netflix or watching this in black and white. Watching this in color would not be possible without a Latinx individual who made it. Focusing back on the Honeycomb Network, you know, if someone walks through the front door, what are they going to be greeted with? What are they going to experience when they walk through the doors?
I mean, they're going to be experiencing a full sensory experience, from the colors that you're seeing to what you're smelling. The biophilia, all the plants that we have here is also very intentional. You know, one of the things that we saw happen, especially during the pandemic, was that people turned to nature to like help with their mental health during this like such a strenuous time. And that is something that, you know, culturally too, you know, we come from lush lands, right? So how do we create a space where you can come in and you can breathe better? You can breathe. It feels like you're stepping outside of the city. You know, when we have so much brick, so much, you know, concrete, so much, you know, urban, you know, landscape, right? Like we are really deprived of that natural element that we really, really need, and that we really, really, you know, that we need to survive in a lot of ways, and survive in a way that helps us feel, you know, much more at ease, much more grounded and well. So they're gonna be greeted with all that, you know, from color therapy through the colors that we have here, which is Caribbean. And I think Latin American, like Caribbean, you know, colors, to our plants, to our herbs and arts and wares, you know. You're going to be greeted by two women, you know, like we're the business owners. You're going to be greeted by, we have an on-site mental health therapist, which is Dorian Ortega, who you know. So we have that wellness component here as well. We have Cristina, who's an herbalist, who can help if you wanted to talk to her about some ailments that you're having, and maybe she can put together a blend for you and customize that. So you have multiple ways that you can be supported. You're going to come into a large space that you can come in and you can do your work at. You can be creative in. We really want to tap into our community's brilliance and creativity and think about how do we create outside of the box. You know, like a lot of these institutions are gatekeepers, you know, that really sort of limit you And we don't want to be limited. We want to create a space where you can really flourish. And so that's what we're trying to encourage. And that's the type of vibe that we're creating. And we want it to feel like a sanctuary. We want you to come in here and be like, whew, I'm so glad I'm in here. I'm so glad I can breathe, because there's a lot. The world is a lot, and so we need spaces where we can find support, find health, find wellness, and find each other.
When you're here too, the other thing that greets you is the art. We don't call ourselves an art gallery, but we host artists in residence each season. That's when it rotates. And so far, the dialogue that has come just from that alone is, I think, something that's really inspiring for people. Our first resident artist was Sam Kirk, and she did a whole series that was inspired specifically by Humboldt Park. And the mural that you see right when you walk in the door is La Reina del Barrio. And I think that spoke volumes to people coming in and seeing an Afro-Caribbean woman's face right when you walk in, right? Made by a, Latinx woman, queer woman also, that's from Chicago, right? So there's like an element of integrity, an element of relatability when you see reflections like that, right? Our second artist, Liz Gomez, she was the spring artist in residence. Her entire collection of work was portraits, but a lot of it was describing how she pulled through her own dark times with challenges of mental wellness, working through her mental wellness challenges, right? She was working through depression. There were pieces up on the wall that talked about, suicide prevention and that kind of work. So each of these things can be, we're talking about racial healing. We're talking about mental health for BIPOC folks. All of those things can be really heavy. But when you're in a space like this that's appealing to your senses, that's nurturing and provides brave space to kind of have that dialogue, I think is something that is unique here. Our current resident artist, Brenda Torres Figueroa, dressed as Home and Refuge, is about gender-based violence, is about, women speaking up. And again, topics that can be heavy, but here you can unpack that and talk about it and know that there's safe, brave space to share, anything on your mind with regard to that topic. When you walk into the Honeycomb Network, you're supported in all these ways, but this is something that I think is almost like a unspoken way to tap into people's needs that they may not even know that they have, creating a space to have dialogues around stuff that's not always like pleasant to talk about. So that's something that I really, really take pride in here of bringing people that know how to facilitate space around those conversations, and know how to show it creatively and express it creatively and show that it's okay to talk about these things and have them show up in your work and be centered and featured even.
I love that. And your point about the first artist in residence you had here you said it was a portrait of Afro-Latina, right? I think that's so important to have that at the forefront because our African roots are so ignored, put to the backdrop, if not just not acknowledged completely. So to be like, bam, this is us, that's great. 100%. And even even your current artist in residence, it was Brenda Torres Figueroa. Shout out to Brenda. Had some really good interactions with Brenda in the past. And this is one of her pieces as well, right? Yes. This is a photo, yes, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah, and she placed it strategically. So this is her daughter looking at her ancestors. That's Brenda's mother, I think grandmother, some of her tias. And so, it's a consistent dialogue thematically and abstractly about how do we see each other? What are we saying to each other? What are those women telling her,
Well, it's always that dialogue. That's always that dialogue that we're trying to foster here in some type of way. How do we reach back, but still continue to move forward?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's so important to really lift up women in our community. So I think the fact that you're lifting up those voices and making sure that that imagery is front and center is so critical to the dialogue that we need in our cultures. Cristina, you mentioned opening up during the pandemic. What was that experience like? Because that sounds so intense. And I remember reading, I think it was a Sun-Times article, or maybe it was a Block Club, Sun-Times, right?
Yeah.
And that's when you first were on my radar, because a former guest of the show, friend of the show, Dory, she had been on the show to talk about Fly Radical. I was like, oh, let me read up on this. And then first thing I found it interesting. Second thing, I was like, what is going through these women's minds? Like, this is intense. Like, this is such a big space. I mean, walk us through that experience, because were you planning to open just before the pandemic, or did you decide during the pandemic to open? Like, how did that work?
It was just before, and we'll definitely both need to speak on this part, but
please.
Like
especially
Denise,
as mothers, like
yeah.
that's, I mean, my gosh. And like the businesses you each have in your own lives. I mean, sorry. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
no, it's fine. Yeah, I had a
Struggling
7-month-old at the time and was like brand new mother of 2, which was huge for me. But like Denise had mentioned earlier, she had been ruminating on this for a long time, right? This was something that I had envisioned for years as well. And not exactly as it is, but just running a space collectively where we can just nurture our respective businesses and then nurture the things we're doing together and have other people do the same. That was kind of really the bones of what it looked like, And so, we had been doing Books Brunch Botanica since 2017. It grew really fast from monthly workshops, sitting on a floor in a circle at a wellness center that I was working at, to, many thousand square feet loft in Humboldt Park, with multiple different rooms of activity, multiple workshops happening, a market that's centered specifically women of color, DJs, live music, live art, food, entertainment, all this stuff, right? And so in December of, I think that was 2019 or 2018, someone who built with us for one of our events was like, y'all have outgrown the space. Like, what are you going to do? And we're just like, we don't know. Mm-hmm. We started kind of looking around casually at spaces. And what we knew was that what we had seen so far in the market wasn't right for us, but it let us know that like something was coming. So, come 2020, Denise, we both at that time lived within a mile of here on either side of Division or on either side of California, right? And so we would go back and forth through here all the time. Denise, just on a whim, was like driving by and was like, that old Joel's Hardware has been empty. Like, let me just call. And so there was really no intention of starting when we started. It was just literally divine timing. And full transparency, I was like, no, Denise, I cannot do this right now. Like,
Really?
The baby's 7 months old. I've got a 4-year-old. I just spent all this money rebranding Ayurvedic Elements, which is my wellness brand, my herbal formula line. Just really thinking about what's practical. And she was like, I'm holding your seat, sis. Like, I'm starting. Do you trust me? And that's a huge, I think, piece of our work, is that absolutely I trust her 100%. And I think, that value is shared between us. And I think that's hard for adults, right? Mm-hmm. To just even trust in one another in that deeply, right? So it began with me saying no, with this space coming up, with getting the keys the first week of March 2020. That was like, we had no idea what was ahead of us.
Yeah. Because that's the month we officially started going into lockdown.
Exactly, second week of March, right before my birthday.
We had stuff planned for April. Even though, in hindsight, though, it wouldn't have worked out. It would have been. We were really jumping ahead. But then, this space sort of called to me. It called to me. I kept looking at it, and I knew Joel's Hardware, what it was before for many years, and I just saw it continuously empty and nobody was saying. I was like, why is no one taking this, And I had no intention to, get into any kind of lease with it. My intention when I first called was to see about us using it for a pop-up for our market. Let's take over the space, activate the space, for maybe a weekend and see, So when I called, that was the intention. And then with further conversation, the broker convinced me to come in. And I came in and I was like, there's no way. Cause this was like completely gutted. I mean, we didn't have floors. There was like wires sticking out. And I was like, no, I already shut it down as soon as I walked in. Like, this was nice. This was fun to come see it, but like, this is not going to happen. And then, he said that the landlord can actually build it out. So I was like, okay, wait a minute, So then further conversation, I started, just getting sort of that seed of hope, like maybe this could work, And so, yeah, I originally went to Cristina. Originally, she was just like, no, understandably so, like having a baby, just a few months ahead, I understood it. I tried to actually connect with some other folks to see if I can get another business partner to go in on this with me. And all of those business partners fell through, like within weeks. Because it wasn't meant to be that. It was meant to be this, and I think that we just had to come around to understanding that and step out of our fears, both of us, and just know that this is what it was, was supposed to be. And so, yeah, so we got it. We had all these plans that we were going to be doing for like April, May, we thought we were going to do all these things. And then the pandemic hit, and that was very difficult. It was difficult. And then it was also a blessing in disguise, if I'm going to be really, really transparent, because it actually allowed us the time to work a lot of the kinks out, do some, virtual things, connect with people in a different way, really sort of like ground into what do we want this place to be? Why is this coming up in this time? There's a bigger purpose for this. And what is it? Right. And so it allowed us that time to really flesh that out, to really experiment, to connect with people we probably wouldn't have connected with had this pandemic not happened, right? And so, and also it showed us how long it really takes to build out a double space, because it wasn't built out until like early summer, maybe?
From July to October, we were in here full time, like every day.
Yeah.
Like every single day, just like pruning and primping and praying and all the things. And so, yeah, it takes months to build a sanctuary.
I've been wondering what this space was before. Because, I mean, you look around Paseo Boricua, you have a lot of businesses that are thriving. You also have a lot of empty storefronts. So I totally forgot that this was the old Joe's Hardware. As the BIPOC community has opportunities like this in front of them, similar to like when you apply for a job and the job offer comes through, and it was almost like this tendency, well, if I say no to this salary they're offering me, maybe they're not going to come back with a counteroffer and go to the next candidate.
Right.
So a lot of people, men, women of color will, or non-binary folks will just accept that first offer.
Yep.
When you say hardcore negotiations,
yes,
what would you say would be helpful to someone that's BIPOC that is looking to open up a business and the landlord's like, this is what we can do? Yeah. And you're like, oh no, let's elevate that a bit more. We know our worth, and
right.
Here's what we'd like to see.
Right.
You take it or leave it.
Right.
What was that? Walk us through that process.
I think that you have to have a real clear vision as to what you're trying to do, and you need to be able to convey the value of what you're doing, and you need to convey it in a way that they understand that your success will be their success. Right. So there's that component. I didn't have a lot to lose, to be honest. I mean, if he said no, I walk away. We had plans, we were going to keep moving regardless, so it really was less, I think for me in that time, even though, I was very serious and really trying to negotiate and really going back and forth. I mean, we went back and forth a few times. They sent me something, I would send it back, and we kind of went back and forth until we agreed. And a lot of I advocated for us as, first-time business owners. I advocated for us as, like trying to have success in that first year, and, I just advocated as much as I could in terms of like what we were trying to do, how we were going to do it, created a pitch deck for the landlord. I think you just have to really show them that you're not playing games, like I'm not playing games. However, I need a strong footing and foundation in order to be successful in this business. At the end of the day, like you can say yes and jump into a business. And then, especially now understanding what it takes, I understand how people can lose their businesses in a year, 5 years. It's very difficult. So you have to know that, like when you're going in, you have to have that advocacy to show that, your vision, needs to be supported. And that also will support them, that will also thrive. As you thrive, the landlord will thrive, right? Like you'll continue to thrive because you'll continue to be here in this space, and he won't have to like empty it out, look for new, tenants. So you kind of have to convince them that that foundation is really, really important. A lot of times they're just trying to fill it, they don't really care, what business is in here. They're trying to fill it, they're trying to get their rent. But you have to make them recognize you. You have to make them look at you and think about what you're trying to do and how, so that they can understand that that's also going to reflect them and their business and their success.
I like that a lot. I think that's a great point. And what's your value proposition? I love that you said, our success is going to be your success. Do you want that monthly income or not? And playing with house money definitely helps. You have that leverage. Can you give me a sense of what do your own support systems look like? Like, I know we talked about like building a team, so y'all have an accountant, right? Getting a lawyer, figuring out ways to delegate and be realistic with what can I accomplish? What do I need some support with? But also, getting this space, like you both blazed your own trail into this. It's tough because it's a small support system, but it's a large support system at the same time, it is small and mighty, in my specific home, it's like, I have 2 small children that I'm caring for, that I was homeschooling also during the initial part of this whole past year. So that was tough, being like a kindergarten teacher, a first grade teacher, an herbalist, a business owner, a business partner, a partner with my actual partner, like my support system at home is small, but like I wouldn't have been able to do this work also without the pandemic, because what it did was put my partner Alfredo out of work. And so we had a huge role reversal happen where in order for me to be here and do the work that I need to do and focus, he has been their primary caregiver, at least during business hours, since we started in 2020. And like, that is an amazing shift. It was also an amazing shift for my children too, to be like, where's mom going? And it's not that I never worked, but I've worked outside of home now more than I ever have in their whole lives. And so for them to see that and see that they can rely on both of us for care, both of us for nourishment, for nurturing, and also recognize like, oh, mom has stuff to do too. She's not just my mom. And as young boys, recognizing that, I think is something so important to realize that like, I'm a mother before anything, but they're also seeing me make liberation moves for all of us. My son has come to work with me multiple times and gets the thrill of like, oh, mom, I get to help you in the shop. Like, this is like on Sesame Street, or, see reflections of himself being a leader at some point. Like, he asked me this week, Mom, so you're the leader of your work, right? And I'm like, yeah, I am. And he's just like, that is so cool. Can I be the leader of my work? And he has all kinds of ideas about what he wants to do, right? Our network of support outside of that, truthfully, is so many women. We built Books, Brunch, and Botanica centering women of color. We are women of color, have naturally been around communities of women all of our lives. And I think I took this for granted until recognizing how strong our community of women is, that what I took for granted is that not all women have this circle of women around them. And I'm so eternally grateful for the women that are around us, because when we have had safety issues here, we've been challenged by gentrifiers here, have had vandalism here, the immediate responders are women, mothers, women, also, our brothers have helped us as well. But truthfully, the people that have offered to like, I'll stake out your space overnight, I'll have a sleepover there, are all women and mothers, and specifically women of color, coming to be, security guards. The only time we've hired security guards for an event, it was 2 women,
Because the men didn't want to do it because it was Humboldt Park at night during the festival, right? Or during June, and there was a lot going on this past one, right? But
Sure.
So, or they were trying to charge us an exorbitant amount because because of safety. And I get it, but also, like,
surprised.
Yeah.
Every time.
Yeah.
Women help hold us.
They hold us down.
Tell me a little bit more about that. Cause I did see that on your social media. You had mentioned like, hey, everybody, someone attacked our Someone attacked our shop again.
Again, yeah.
What happened?
Goodness,
Which
time?
Shoot, we could go to both. I mean, we could go to both. Like, what happened both times? Like, no, let's just start there. What happened both times?
Well, we started with resistance from some of the residents, even in this. This building also holds residents here and in the building, and all of them are not from here. Like, pretty much, I would say all of them that are in this building are not from here. They're not even from Chicago, a lot of them. Jeez. And so, we were dealing with them. Doing some things, and we were just dealing with some petty harassment things. They were accusing us of they were accusing us of stealing. They were accusing us of doing all kind of stuff. They were waiting till we left and leaving letters and notes or vandalizing garbage. They were throwing food in front of our doors. They were doing a lot of really dirty things, but then we couldn't say that they were doing them because they were doing them at night. Mm-hmm. And so it was a lot of tension for a while, and some confrontations for sure. And
was it confrontations over the type of conversations you were hosting in this space?
Because we hadn't even opened yet. This is before we even opened. We're literally in here building chairs, we hadn't even opened yet, and we were already dealing with a lot of this.
Yeah.
And then, before we opened, it calmed down. We were able to have, kind of a final confrontation and conversation that then kind of alleviated that situation. But it was tense, and it was tense because it was a white male who was doing this to us mostly, and
did he just really like Joe's hardware? Or
no,
he just where am I going to buy my hammers?
No, he didn't even know about that. Yeah,
wow.
Yeah. And just, it was just it was really a lot of intimidation tactics, being done. So then that chilled out, and, we were able to open and, fine. And then we started getting other things again happening. People were leaving feces in front of our door, then Cristina came and they had bombed our storefront with eggs, 24 eggs on a day we were going to do a pop-up. And again, speaking to our community, right, that you asked about, the women that came for the pop-up, because it was really women of color, Black and Latinx women. They came in their gym shoes, we're ready, you know what I mean? And so that really says a lot, when people show up in that way, because we could have been oh, that's a lot happening over there, and let me just not go, or what I'm saying, or just mind my business, and that would have been totally fair and valid for them to do, to be honest, but they didn't. They came in, they helped us clean, they stood there, they offered assistance. What do we, asked us what we needed. We're ready for whatever, they were ready for whatever.
So that second attack on your space, the egg bombing, right? Mm-hmm. That was the second one. Where do you think that came from?
It could be anything, honestly. When that's one of the things that we said, that, because people were saying that, what could it be? What could it be? And I was honestly, it could be anything. It could be, the fact that of who we're centering. It could be the fact that we're calling out gentrification as well in our programming. It could be the fact that we're speaking on LGBTQ and trans rights. It could be the fact that we're talking about abolition. It could be all of those things that people can be really upset about. People have a myriad of ways to be upset with us, in terms of us pushing back on some of these structures that we feel have been really damaging and harmful to our communities. And how do we find ways to unpack and create something different? People don't like different. It's hard. People really like to stay comfortable or in their privilege, or even if they don't like it, are scared, to step outside and think about what that could look like, a possibility of a new world and a new dynamic, a new system can look like. And you're going to get resistance, you're going to get resistance. So we've gotten resistance for sure.
Yeah. But
no, to this day, we don't know who did it. People have tagged our stuff. I mean, it's been left and right, but we're really protected. And, even with all that, there's been a lot of protection too. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That takes a lot of courage, a lot of bravery to kind of withstand I'm like, I don't want to sound like I'm minimizing it, but like Dennis the Menace type tactics. Like, who leaves crap on someone? Like, I'm surprised. Like, I'm surprised they didn't do like a ding dong dash and like light it on fire type of thing. It just doesn't. That's not constructive. Doesn't help anybody. But I think it is reflective to what a lot of people that born and raised here are trying to keep their roots, stay rooted here, have experienced. Hola, Joshua Smyser-DeLeon here, founder and host of the Paseo podcast. Thanks for listening to the show, where we highlight stories by, from, and about the Puerto Rican community, from La Isla to the diaspora. If you want to help us share the diverse and vibrant stories that make up the Puerto Rican communities here on Paseo Boricua in Chicago and around the world, subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you stream your podcasts. Subscribing helps more people find the show and will help you make sure you never miss an episode. Leaving a 5-star rating and showing some love in the comments helps too. You can also give a donation by looking up the Paseo podcast on savechicagomedia.org. Okay, that's enough from me. Enjoy the show. So we talked about the importance of passing down generational knowledge. We talked about generational trauma, the importance of giving yourself space and finding opportunities to really work on your own well-being, holistic well-being. Just curious, in your own lives, how do you address the issue of generational trauma? How do you address your own well-being so that your mind, body, soul are in alignment?
So I would say for me, well, in general, it's challenging. It's something that takes like a lot of work every day, and it's a lot of little bites, or at least that's what works for me, is doing it in like all these bite-sized micro ways. But the way I personally unpack generational trauma is this, it's this work, right? It's showing up every day, whether I'm afraid or tired or uncertain of what I need to do here. It's reminding myself that this is bigger than me, that I was divinely guided to get to this place. And regardless of what it looks like in my bank account or in accolades or in any of those things, I'm showing up every single day. And for me, that's like a ceremony, right? I'm coming here every day in a good way to try to leave the space better than when I found it, to leave myself better than when I started the day, right? So committing to this work and seeing this dream manifest into something sustainable, long-term, something that's legacy building, that's like my way of unpacking my intergenerational trauma, because I was raised by a single mother who had 4 daughters, and had all these dreams that she couldn't achieve in her lifetime. But, in her words was like, each of you are better than me, and each of you are seeing out something that I saw for myself. And that's kind of how I feel successful. So this work is part of it. But then on a like very personal level, it's, making sure that I'm hydrated. It's like, measuring my 22-ounce thermos to make sure I've got dandelion root tea in there, or my ashwagandha tea. It's making sure that I'm like breathing deep into my belly and not being tense. It's making sure that like my face is relaxed and I'm blinking slowly and speaking from from my heart center as much as I can, right? So it's like taking my actual physical bodily functions into account throughout the day, right? Trying to remember to nourish as much as I can, try to make my own food as much as I can, because each of those things I believe are medicine. They're all sacred rituals, and that's part of what my work is. My hashtags always for Ayurvedic elements are like food, herbs, rituals. When you lean on those routines, but you ritualize them and make them more sacred, it's less of a like maintenance and it's more of a like joyful act, right? Remembering to drink warm water, trying not to drink as much coffee as my body thinks I need, right? So it's like all these little sacred moments. And then also it's raising my children to see me in a different way than like I think women have been seen in their families prior to this generation, right? I want my sons to see the fact that their dad is here to hold space for us in all the ways, not just the ways a man should, and help them recognize, what does it mean to be sensitive? What does it mean to be open and free and like not even think about gender roles. You know, I try to not put gender on them. I try to like let them just be expressive people. I try to teach them language that, you know, represents as much. And so, you know, that's also part of unpacking my intergenerational trauma, is being really intentional about how I raise my children, you know, trying to homeschool them, trying not to ever hit them, trying to, you know, be calm for them when they're not, and think about parenting in like a completely different way than anyone in my lineage has before me, right? And honoring what I have learned from my parents, but also trying to make it that much better, so that just like my mother said I was better than her, my children are going to be better than me. And we're going to keep this legacy moving forward until, you know, like Denise said earlier, we're reflecting to BIPOC here that we are brilliant, that we do have skills, that we can be in leadership. And so in order to see that reflected back to us from the world, like we need to be sharing this with our children, regardless of how old they are, talking about abolition, talking about racism, talking about what it means to be respectful and kind and all of that stuff, right? It starts at 3 years old and 7 years old and 17. So those are all some of the ways that I'm working on that work personally.
Yeah, I think much like Cristina, this part of this work is what that is. It's reflecting that. It's trying to create what I felt like I always needed, you know, trying to have a model that I needed. That's part of the unpacking for me, having that space to do it, connecting with different types of people with different experiences, and giving space to listen, to, you know, absorb, and to offer support. That's a big one. Also, you know, again, with the kids, I feel like, yeah, I just am pretty much like co-signing all of that, because that's super important to me as well. You know, like my child comes here and works after school, has been part of the Heal On Academy program that started with our mental health therapist. Is also helped with mural making, like things like that, you know, where we have a space where they can come in and have a chance to unpack some of those harder things that, you know, we're trying to figure out how to navigate, that our parents were trying to figure out how to navigate, right? Our parents were in survival mode many times, you know, didn't have access to a therapist that looked like them, that was accessible to them. So we have a therapist that looks like them, is accessible to them here. So always thinking about, what did I need? What did we need? What have we heard that we need? What do our children need, right? And how do we build upon that need? In terms of like personally, I need to get better. You know, like that's one of the things that I've come up against. I think walking the talk in terms of wellness, you know, like I think it's very hard, you know, sometimes to navigate my tendency to overwork, especially because this is a business that like falls all on our shoulders. There's a lot that goes into it, and we have a lot to do. And so, you know, also trying to remember, and I have people around me like Dorian, like Cristina, who are like, did you drink water today? Have you eaten lunch today? You know, like having also sometimes a support system around you who remembers before you do, you know, is also important, because I think a lot of times we can self-sacrifice, you know, sometimes for, you know, and so that's something I'm trying to unpack and, you know, do better at as well. Prayer is big for me, you know, as much as people, you know, kind of are like, you know, prayer can be this sort of thing that people look down upon, or, you know, because a lot of times it's sort of like synonymous with like inaction, right? Like thoughts and prayers. But I also feel like within the last few years, I've really learned how much prayer is like important in my life, you know, and needed for me to ground. And I pray differently. I also have a really strong connection with my ancestor lineage, my mother who crossed over. That's very important spiritual practice for me. I find ways to, you know, create programming here that I feel like I need. So like, you know, I love to write, but I don't always have the time or can't find that time. So let me create, you know, this writing workshop that was sort of like, you know, I'm sure that if I'm feeling this, other people are feeling this. So then that group comes, and then now I'm here and I'm writing and I'm part of something that's not only helping serve me and unpacking some of my stuff and what I need, but also giving that back, you know? And so always finding these ways to sort of like connect those dots, you know, like whatever's good working for me, I want to have that available here for others and vice versa, so those are some of the ways for sure. Definitely thinking about, like a lot of our programming here is intergenerational. So I feel like that's another thing that we're trying to think about, like that's very indigenous, like how we work together intergenerationally. Like we have programming here for young folks, kids, we have programming here for teens, we have programming here for adults, we have elders who come in. And so like we learn from all of them and we can also be nourished by all of them. So that's some of the work. Yeah.
Another question I wanted to ask you all just to kind of close out our conversation. I appreciate your honesty, your transparency, and kind of giving us a peek into what I think is a beautiful world and journey of well-being. And we all kind of have our own path to that. But speaking of like our own paths, our identities, just curious to hear from you. Denise, let's start with you. What does being Puerto Rican mean to you? Mm-hmm. Cristina, as the Mexicana that's invited to the Boricua barbecue here, super interested to hear from you. Like, what does being Mexicana mean to you? So, Denise, let's start with you.
Being Boricua to me is, wow, that's a deep question. Like, how do I even begin to explain that? I feel like it's my roots, right? Like, it's the core of me. Being Boricua for me, I'm also of the diaspora. I was born and raised in Chicago. I've traveled, back and forth to the island, but have the same kind of like reaction sometimes, ni de aquí, ni de allá, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I speak Spanglish, I understand better than I speak, that in that sense too, which has also been, something that, many times we're shamed about, right? But I'm very Puerto Rican to my core, like I'm, from my lands, the connection that I feel to the lands, to the connection that I feel to the ancestors, to the connection that I feel to our history. I feel like being Boricua is being resilient. We are resilient people. Our island is small but mighty. And we take that mighty spirit everywhere we go. The fact that we've been able to be, the fact that we have been so colonized and so brutalized and are able to still stand in our culture the way that we do speaks to our resilience, speaks to our brilliance, and speaks to our cultural integrity. And that to me is very profound and very unique to us as people. We have, so much light that we offer. We have so much spiritual connection to lands and to herbs. And that's part of, what we try to represent here. We have been really overlooked, even within the Latinx umbrella, right? Like it's not always something that I always felt connected to. It felt very much like we were excluded in that way. I think that, again, we're still able to stand on our own. I feel like I have a spirit of resiliency in me, and of love, of culture, and of family, of food, and understanding, the ways that it connects with us and connects with our spirits and our culture. And I think that comes from being Boricua, I think that comes from the roots, I don't know how else to explain it. To me, being Puerto Rican is such a major thing for me, and a major part of my life, a major part of my culture, a major part of the way I think on a political level. All of that comes from being Puerto Rican and having the experiences of being Puerto Rican, especially in the diaspora. So that's what that means for me, just resiliency and love, So, yeah.
Cristina, what about you?
Yeah, it's a tough question. The first thing that came to mind when you said, what does it mean to be Mexican? It's like the first thing that I think of is it means to be First Nation, and that breaks down to, you could call me Mexican. you could, wave the Mexican flag around me. None of that is what calls to my soul, right? First Nation is that all of these lands are my lands. I'm indigenous to here, as indigenous as these trees, right? And what it signifies to me is like a groundedness, something that can't be moved, something that can't be shaken, something that can't be taken from me. This is me and I am this, right? It's like a universal connection. That's what being, so-called Mexican feels like or means to me, is that, in my moments of struggle or worry, overwhelm, any of those things, like I'm reminded of First Nation teachings, right? If you're feeling shaky, look at a mountain, look at a tree. Do they move? No, they're not shakeable, right? Be like water. You can overwhelm anything. You can penetrate anything. And these are the things that I think of when I think about what it means to be like indigenous to these lands. Like I am this, right? And community is the other thing that I think of when I think about being Mexican, right? Our indigenous ways were there is no I, right? It's we are a collective. It's that we heal together, we learn together, we build together, we learn about the stars together. And I think that's the third thing I think about with regard to like my roots, is that my people studied the stars in a way that like not many other like indigenous folks in the world did. And maybe that could be ignorant because I don't know. Actually, I know that there's many wisdom keepers of like star knowledge in Africa and other places, right? But what we did for astronomy in regards to like First Nation peoples of like the Mexican country is like out of this world, what people were studying hundreds and hundreds of years ago and what we knew and still know, right? So my inner wisdom and connection to the cosmos is what I really hold on to, because all of that knowledge was stolen from us, like burned to the ground and tried to there was the attempt of eradication. And that was not possible considering how many people were murdered and killed as a result of colonization on this side of the world alone. The fact that any of us are still here and holding this sacred wisdom is like magical to me. And when I think about how strong my intuition is, I think about my connection to my ancestors and to this land. It's what helps, you were talking to Denise about talk about this hardcore negotiation, right? That all comes from intuition. Denise didn't get a degree in business. Her intuition is strong because of her connection to her roots. My intuition is like something that I've questioned my whole life because I feel like I've always had an alternative source of information that I didn't know where it came from. And it took, all these rites of passages throughout my life for me to recognize every single time my intuition is right, and that comes from a sacred knowing that I believe reminds me of my connection to the cosmos and to this land. And that is like, for me, the definition of First Nation, right? These are my ways. I'm always going to be coming back to them, relearning them, remembering them, because I don't have a book to read and I don't have mentors or First Nation leaders around me all the time. That information is hard to access. And so that's part of what it means. And it connects again with what we do here at the Honeycomb Network, because we are trying to create pathways back to those sacred teachings, are not something you can read about. Like, they're not things you can Google. They're not, it's like information that was so sacred and so like illegal that like people are still afraid to come out and talk about things. I've had women come here this summer specifically asking me about buying tarot decks, about buying smudge sticks, and were like whispering to me about, where can I learn more about this? What can I do with this? Because we are still traumatized by being burned at the stake, by being brujas. It's like people are all trendy about like, oh, bruja this and bruja that. And it's like, there's a lot of blood shed on this land for those practices, for things that we have the privilege of sharing in the open right now. And so we take those things very seriously here. And that's also part of what makes us a sanctuary, is that this is a brave space that is holding space for things that women and men have died for very recently, for our spiritual beliefs, for our sacred beliefs, for how we move in the world. So, speaking loudly and proudly about, indigenous ways is something that is part of my identity and part of me figuring out how to circle back to my roots without having like a guidebook or a mentor.
I think those are two of the most in-depth responses we've ever gotten to
I'm
that
still thinking of more.
question.
I'm like, I should have said this.
Oh, I know, and I'm sure, like as you reflect on it, I'm sure like there's no limit to the depths of what you can really, the light you can shed on your own journeys and how you connect to your identity and the ancestors. That's why I really like that question, because everybody has a unique response. So again, appreciate you going to that detail, going there. No, don't apologize. Never apologize for that. That's why you have this space to have those types of conversations, right? So if people want to learn more about the Honeycomb Network, keep up with you all, how can they do that? Give us the website, the social media channels, if they want to just keep up with y'all beyond this conversation.
Yeah, people can find us at thehoneycombnetwork.com. They can also check out our Instagram or Facebook, the Honeycomb Network.
Lots of ways to stay connected and get involved. Love it. And, again, just really appreciative of your time, appreciative of you opening up your space to us to even have this conversation. I know it was a long time in the making, but as we've kind of hinted at and touched on in this conversation, things are meant to happen for a reason, and they happen in their own time. Yeah. So Cristina Gutierrez, Denise Ruiz, thank you for being on the Paseo podcast today.
Thank you so much for having us and for the questions and just like carving this space to, hear us and give us a platform to speak on what we're doing and why. So thank you so much as well.
Ditto.
Appreciate y'all. Thank you.
Thank you.